Hello and welcome to Electoral Dysfunction from Sky News with me, Beth Rigby.
Me, Ruth Davidson.
Me, Harriet Harman, and Happy New Year.
What a year it has been already, and we're only a few days in. This week, you won't be surprised that we have had one massive story to talk about. There is so much noise about grooming gangs, Jess Phillips and Elon Musk. Just before we get into that, a reminder of what's actually happened. Jess Phillips had said to the Oldham Council, if you want to do an inquiry into grooming gangs, you should have a locally led independent inquiry rather than a government-led one. But then Musk grabbed it, didn't he? And started amplifying it online. And then it was just this avalanche, and Reform started calling for an inquiry. And then the Conservatives started calling for inquiry. And then there were these sort of attacks on Jess about cover-ups. There was lots about it being race-related, which I don't want to get into right this moment, but we are definitely going to get into it in this pod. And then here we are a week later.
Well, that's why Elon Musk picked it up, because it was the anti-woke agenda, the idea that men of Pakistani origin, heritage, were raping young white girls, and that Musk saw this as an opportunity to bash the wokery and to pursue his culture wars. And that's why he did it, and that's why Reform and then Conservatives jumped on the bandwagon.
Since last summer, he has been absolutely gunning for Keir Starmer as part of his role, as he sees it, as the owner and operator of, again, his view, a free speech site, and seeing people being prosecuted. It is a whole lot of hobby horses of Musk's that serve nobody but Musk that is behind all of this, in my view.
Andrew Norfolk, who was the chief investigative reporter at the Times, he was the one that actually wrote extensively on this back in 2012. There's all these accusations that the mainstream media had covered it up. That is just untrue. There have been a number of inquiries. We're going to get into all of it, but just to kick off, it's just maybe in this space worth correcting the record on that. But look, obviously at the centre of this whole story has been Jess Phillips, our past podcaster who's now the safeguarding minister in the government. Let's hear from her.
I'll be completely honest with you, Beth. There is those moments where you go, is this the life I asked for? I was direct service provider before I was an MP, and you think, maybe I'll just go back to doing that. Maybe I'll just go back to running a local women's refuge.
You want to remove yourself.
And then you go, no, you're there for a reason. Keir Starmer gave me the job. It was not uncontentious that giving me my job back after I had resigned, and he did it because he believes that I'm the best person to get this job done. Now, what will hurt me in the future is if I have gone through this, and look, and I don't want to overstate it. It's not been pleasant for me, and I don't want to understate it either. But if you compare it to the things I've seen, that those women have been through, that those young girls, I've met women who were branded by abusers, literally marks on them to say that they were owned. I've met women raped by 20 men in 5 hours. Like, nothing compares. And so then I go back to that. I go, no, hang on. But what will hurt me is if I go through all of this and I don't manage to change things. The idea that I want to cover things up. I literally wrote a book about the Rochdale grooming scandal and how the whistleblowers were sacked. It's just such a joke, isn't it? And so those women and those girls who I've worked with for over years, I did go through that. Of course I did. I was like, is this worth it? And I'm saying it to my husband. And maybe one day I'll decide it isn't. Maybe that day will come. But it's not today.
That's from a long chat I had with Jess earlier this week. We've put it out as an extra podcast in your feeds now, so you can go and listen to that whole conversation.
We've all had those moments in politics where we're under unbelievable pressure and go, do you know what? Fuck it. I was doing good work before. I don't need this. Like, can people just get out of my way and allow me to continue without the noise, without the incoming fire and all the rest of it? And I completely understand why she's in that position. I also don't doubt that she's going to double down and work twice as hard. But she's absolutely right. At the crux of all of this, actually, this isn't a fight between Jess Phillips and Elon Musk. This is about women who, when they were children, were let down and had the most horrific things happen to it. And there's a lot of people out there who, yes, they know about grooming gangs, but they don't really want to think about it or consider it or dwell on it because it's awful. Like, the things that you have to imagine in your mind's eye is horrific, some of the things these women went through.
Well, I just feel overwhelmed with admiration for Jess. I mean, I've always been an admirer of hers, and I just think she's shown extraordinary qualities. A commitment to the cause, which has been her lifelong commitment, which is to protect girls and women from male violence, particularly male sexual violence, and also a resilience, but also a political understanding. So instead of just being knocked back by the unfairness of it, the threatening nature of this attack, and the fact that it's a global now attack thanks to Elon Musk. But Jess Phillips, a junior minister in the Home Office, she's standing up to him and she's saying, I am going to deliver on my agenda. And if what you've done is going to turbocharge my ability to deliver on that agenda, that's what I'm going to do. So she's empowering herself rather than shrinking back.
I want to put this question to you, actually, Harriet, because it was sent by Sue. Sue sent this in and she says, I'm incensed at the abuse being held at our lovely Jess Phillips. What are your thoughts on Elon Musk's bizarre comments? And do you think Labour's response is enough?
It's monstrous and unfair, and the threatening nature of it and the overwhelming nature of it, she hinted at when she talked about, she would sometimes think, am I going to actually just go back to running a frontline service? But I know she won't, because of what she said in the discussion with you, Beth, about she knows she is a beacon for women and girls who are threatened with male sexual violence. And if she fell down in front of this attack, where would they be left? They would be left exposed. She knows she is their front line, and therefore she will just carry on doing that and delivering the change.
What about Labour's response?
One of the things it started off with Elon Musk going, and this is his position, this is about freedom of speech versus censorship. And I think it was very good right early on when Keir Starmer said, no, this is not about freedom of speech versus censorship. This is about truth versus lies. Actually, what's got to happen now is the Labour government has got to turn it around from being about the process. Should it be a national inquiry or should it be a locally based inquiry in Oldham, to actually being about the action? And I think that's the agenda they will get onto. But I think it very much exposes the Conservatives. At every moment, they've been on the wrong side of the argument on this. It's fair enough for them to disagree about the process. These are tactical decisions. But to actually challenge the good faith of Keir Starmer on this, to challenge the good faith of Jess Phillips on this, is just wrong. And sometimes something that might seem tactically advantageous for opposition is disastrous because it just puts them thoroughly on the wrong side of an argument.
I mean, Ruth, obviously, there's been a huge amount of chat this week, not least at Prime Minister's questions about grooming gangs, whether there should be a new national inquiry. And sort of amid all the noise, the central question has become, do we need a second national inquiry? As I was saying, we'd had the independent inquiry into child sexual exploitation, as you point out, Ruth, started by none other than Theresa May when she was Home Secretary. Who do you agree with on this? Jess Phillips says she doesn't think it's necessary. She wants to get on with action of delivery, but she did say to me in this interview, look, if victims tell me that they want an inquiry, I will listen to victims. It's not that she's ideologically opposed to it. She just doesn't think that that's the thing that is necessary in terms of actually dealing with this. Kemi Badenoch has a very different view. Who do you agree with, Ruth?
I'm not entirely sure in terms of what I believe whether another one's needed. I see merits in both arguments. In terms of the arguments that have been put forward by the government this week, I think they have absolutely landed, and that there is broad agreement within the country that Elon Musk has been peddling fake news and disinformation in a dangerous and self-serving way that doesn't benefit victims. I actually think they've landed pretty well, that the Tories have been a bit exploitative about this, and that Kemi Badenoch's a hypocrite for not having met with any victims herself. I think they've landed that. What I actually don't think that they've got acceptance about is this idea that there is no need for a further inquiry. I don't think they've made that case yet. And I think that there are arguments. Like I say, I don't actually know what the right answer is here, but grooming gang, 25 men that are raping and gang raping 12, 13-year-old girls in local authority care above a taxi firm, for example, that doesn't just start as 25 guys and dozens of girls. It starts somewhere. And I think that if the J report didn't show us the upstream of where it starts, how it starts, if it didn't link between all of these different independent inquiries and individual local authority ones, what are the points of congruence? What are the points where we could see? What were the points where we missed the first signs that something was happening here? What were the points of intervention that didn't happen? That actually there is merit in that. And I think that I can see that argument as well. I can also see the argument that we've already got 20 recommendations from Jay which haven't been implemented yet, so why don't we do that bit first? But I also see the point that you can have a full national inquiry while still having local inquiries in Oldham and using the data from each to cross-populate. I don't think tacking on an amendment to a bill, which also includes safeguarding, that would have sunk the bill, as they did this week, was potentially the best way to go about it if Kemi Badenoch really believes we need another inquiry. We're 10 days into this story. Much better to go up and meet with some victims, or send your shadow Home Secretary, or send your shadow Justice Minister to do that and see what they want. And there's been victims that have spoken out. So you've got Samantha Walker-Roberts from Oldham, whose rapist was jailed for 6 years, saying that she wants another inquiry. Sammy Woodhouse from Rotherham, whose rapist was jailed for 35 years, saying that she wants another inquiry. So there are victims out there that say that, and much better, I think, for the Conservatives, if they truly believe that Theresa May's inquiry wasn't enough and they want another one, much better for them to go and stand with victims, listen with them, have them lead and say, we agree with you, and we will work with you to encourage the current Labour government to do that. I think that would have been a much better way of doing it rather than what they did this week.
After Prime Minister's questions...
Oh, I know, it was the most obvious question. I know what you're going to say.
Yes.
And I held my head in my hands when I read it come through.
Just explain it, because everyone's like, well, I don't know what happened, but go and tell me.
As well as Kemi Badenoch putting this amendment onto this Children Education Protection Bill that was going through, she also went on at PMQs, which you would understand, as the leader of the opposition, you then have to do a briefing afterwards. Your spokesperson has to do a briefing. First question, so has Kemi ever met with any victims? No. Does she have any plans to meet with any victims? No. Okay, what? It is the most basic thing in the world. And being the leader of the opposition, you have to work. You have to go out and listen to people. You have to sit down. You have to do the round tables. You have to do the public meetings. You have to do all of this stuff. And Kemi Badenoch, in the brief time that she's been there, has shown she doesn't want to do any of that.
There's been a lot going on this week. Let's just unpack it a bit for people, for our dysfunctioners listening. The point was that the Conservative Party tabled an amendment to the Children's Wellbeing Bill at the second reading. Now, that means that if it was supported, the whole bill would have collapsed. Harriet, what the hell was going on?
So basically, there's a process whereby when a bill comes to the House of Commons, it has its second reading, which is when the House decides, in principle, whether to actually take the bill forward. And it's for the opposition, if they choose to oppose the bill by saying in an motion which is put down, which says this House declines to give the bill a second reading because, and then that sets out the reasons why they're against it. But the difficulty with putting that in is that actually if you succeed with that motion, this House declines to give the bill a second reading because the bill actually falls. And the reason why it hasn't happened that the opposition has managed to make bills fall at this stage is because governments have a majority when they bring forward bills. But this is a very important bill. It's about protecting children who are taken out of school by their parents. And so this new law prevents children being, quote, homeschooled, unless there are criteria and that they still be under the surveillance of the education and social services authorities. So this is an important bill based on a real life problem. But what the Conservatives did, it would have kiboshed that bill if they'd have succeeded. Now, they couldn't succeed because they actually are in a very small minority. But that was their position we want to stop this bill. They voted for a motion which says declines to give this bill a second reading. And what they were doing is they were using a process to raise a debate. But fundamentally, they did it in a way which was very exposing of them.
You say it was exposing of them. I mean, it gave the Conservatives an opportunity to say Labour will not back a national inquiry into grooming gangs, and that has become what they have taken from that.
What I think the government are saying very emphatically, and I think they're right about, is there is no point rerunning the Alexis J inquiry, which took 7 years and £200 million. So I think they're right to do a hard opposition on that. But ironically, in the same week that they were criticised for setting up a public inquiry and commission process on social care, because they should be, quotes, doing something about it rather than just having another inquiry. It just shows that there's a lot of politics around the process, but I think they're absolutely right to say no repeat of the Alexis J inquiry. She's done her work. But they are saying if there are further things that need to be looked into, we will look further into them. And one of the issues here, which I think will need to be addressed by the Labour government, is just as people need to be trained and be confident in their roles in terms of being anti-racist.
Yes.
People need to be trained and confident in their role that they can take on issues which are in particular communities.
Yes.
And that does not mean they are racist. And
yes.
Anne Cryer, who was a former Labour MP for Keighley, she spoke very compellingly about how when she raised the issue of forced marriage, when she raised the issue of grooming gangs, she was accused of being a racist. And therefore, the question is how people actually deal with this. And I think that whether it's task force, whether it's more action plans, whether it's a mini inquiry on this, this is something that we need to develop resilience in, police, CPS, but above all, in councils where people can feel we know we're doing the right thing here. We are culturally supportive for our diverse communities, but there are boundaries, and these are where the boundaries are.
Let's talk about race, because this is part of the argument that is being made, which is the idea that because in some of these grooming cases, it was men from Pakistani heritage that were organising these rings and the victims were young white girls, okay? And this is what Professor J wrote in her report in 2022. She said, I think this actually refers to the Rotherham case, by the way. By far the majority of perpetrators were described as Asian by victims, yet throughout the entire period, counsellors did not engage directly with the Pakistan heritage community to discuss how best they could jointly address the issue. And Harriet, that is what you are raising there.
And particularly women in those communities, they're fighting patriarchy and misogyny in their own communities, and they should be supported.
There's accusations flying around that Labour councillors and councils covered this up because it was going to upset community relations, that some of these Muslim communities were Labour supporters and voters and they didn't want to upset the apple cart with the people that supported them in their local communities. That boil has not been lanced, has it, Harriet?
Well, I think the J report was really quite clear about this, because she did make a finding, which was in her report, that councillors were often reluctant to discuss the issue because they didn't know how to discuss it without feeling that they were being culturally insensitive or that they might engender accusations of racism against them. So that was actually put in the J report, and that was then brought to the House of Commons. And Yvette Cooper said, we must be absolutely clear that there can be no cultural justification for rape or violence against women in any way, shape whatsoever. And that was backed up by the Conservative government at the time. So there was actually a cross-party moment then where it was recognised that race was a problematic issue here. There's two things going on. One, the universal problem of misogyny, male sexual predatory violence against women and girls, but also there's the added dimension here about race and cultural sensitivity. But that was already acknowledged on a bipartisan basis, but not really much was done about it. And I think that's the next step.
The person that actually worked so hard on modern slavery and child sexual abuse was the former Conservative Prime Minister, Theresa May, who did a shitload of work on this.
She won't be agreeing with Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick on this at all, I wouldn't have thought.
And that's what I wanted to neatly segue me in there. Ruth, what do you make of Robert Jenrick's remarks about Britain's Pakistani community? Because this is what he tweeted. The scandal started with the onset of mass migration, importing hundreds of thousands of people from alien cultures who possess medieval attitudes towards women. And he went on to suggest sectarian voting blocs make it electoral suicide for some MPs to confront this.
It's pretty inflammatory, isn't it? And it's not helpful. I don't think that makes life better for any single person that's been the victim of this. And I think that actually there is a debate to be had. We're having it now because broadly, Harriet and I have taken slightly different nuanced views on whether there is merit in another inquiry or not, despite neither of us being particularly fixed in our view, acknowledging where we accept other people's points. We've been able to do that in a way that's had light, I think, or I hope, without heat. Whereas actually what we've seen this week is a lot of heat without light.
Let's cut to the chase on this. Like, number one, you got Robert Jenrick, who's a leadership contender, coming out and saying those sorts of inflammatory remarks. What is he up to?
So I think part of the response was a tit for tat. And if you remember, during the election, there was a Labour advert that had a picture of Rishi Sunak with a signature underneath it that says, do you think adults convicted of sexually assaulting children should go to prison? Rishi Sunak doesn't. And that came completely off the back of a similar sort of parliamentary procedure.
Yes.
And it really pissed people off. Because nobody thinks that Rishi Sunak doesn't think you should prosecute people that abuse kids. Like, nobody thinks that. And they were really annoyed about that. And I think there's a bit of tit for tat in this. And I think that actually victims deserve better on both sides.
When I was at the speech on Monday, the Prime Minister was talking about the NHS. I knew that he would not answer a question on what he thought of Elon Musk. I knew he would not answer that question. But I thought, if I ask him a question about Jess Phillips and the abuse that she has faced, he's going to bite. He said a few months ago, politicians across the House would have come out and condemned this abuse of Jess Phillips, and they're not doing it now. And it's like about standards in public life. And I tweeted out what he said. And a former Conservative MP sent me a message with exactly that attack ad, Ruth, that you have just referenced. And we should acknowledge that, right? That it's not like the Labour Party have not engaged in some of this awful skullduggery, and actually two wrongs don't make a right, as my mother used to
Exactly, and
tell
that's the
me.
point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, but Ruth, when Boris Johnson was leading the Conservative Party, you were really deeply uncomfortable with that. Is that how you're feeling now when you see the tenor and tone of the leadership of the party?
Yeah, I'm not a Kemi supporter. She's squandering the window she has to change people's minds about her. She's not doing the work. She's not got the energy. And this is student politics, and people deserve better.
I did ask Jess about what she thought about the Conservative response, Kemi Badenoch, Rob Jenrick. This is what Jess said.
All Elon Musk has done has brought it to Kemi Badenoch's attention. Well, she should have been paying attention before.
You're fuming with
I am
Kemi
absolutely
Badenoch.
bloody furious.
Actually, you were a bit terrifying then.
I am absolutely furious. All I'm going to say is I'm going to start ringing them when I have to go and sit in courtrooms with rape victims. I'm going to start to see if they want to come along. Kemi is an open invitation. Next time I go and pick up a grooming victim, every Friday afternoon in my office, I allocate 2 hours for the girls I've supported over the years, because they need to be supported for years and years and years afterwards. And so 2 hours of every Friday afternoon of my working week, is allocated to ensure that any of those girls can come in and see me, because they need support for a long time. Kemi Badenoch is more than welcome to come along and talk to some of them.
You're really angry because you think that
I think that they don't care.
The thing is that Jess has been pushing for tough action on this when she was in opposition, but also from within government. And now she will know that there will be much more impetus behind what she has always wanted to do. So she is using what Elon Musk has done and what Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage has done to strengthen her arm to actually deliver. And that's what she will do.
I want to ask one other thing of you, Harriet, because Ruth, you've talked a bit about how you feel ambivalent about the idea about another inquiry.
Not ambivalent. I'm not sure in my own head. I'm seeing both arguments.
Yes.
That there is merit in it. There are things that it can do that would be helpful. But I also can accept that there are lots of recommendations there from, a Tory that clearly did care in terms of Theresa May and setting up the J inquiry. There are a lot of people within previous governments and within the Conservative Party more generally who might have been on the backbenches and not in government who have done work here.
Harriet, before we go to a break, you obviously don't want a repeat of the J report, but there are a lot of people calling for a separate inquiry into grooming gangs specifically. Do you think that the line will hold not to do that? Do you think that's feasible, or do you think in the end the government will move?
Well, I think when you've got a problem, which is a continuing problem, I mean, obviously, having said, we don't want to repeat the Alexis J inquiry, and the government is completely right on that. But there's always got to be an openness to further analysis, further consideration of what proposals would move things forward. And I think Jess Phillips has made that quite clear. She's open to further analysis. Whatever the nature of the process is, she has not shut the door on that. And, that is something which might well happen in the future, but what the parameters of it will be is a question that should be discussed. I mean, I'd like to see the Conservative Party sensibly discussing with the government what should be the parameters of a future inquiry. Obviously, they can't really be arguing they want an absolute repeat of the 7 years and £200 million of the J inquiry. What is it that they're actually proposing? They should put forward perhaps some terms of reference that they think that this is the terms of reference of a future inquiry. And then the government and everybody can discuss whether or not actually they've already got that sorted and that it ought to be something else they look into. So we just, it's become a bit binary, but there ought to be a sensible discussion about the process around this. And we need to move back to what Ruth was referring to before, is a bit more cross-partisanship on this. It is bizarre that there should be party political divide over the question of protecting young girls from predatory rapist gangs.
Look, should we take a break and then we're going to come back and talk about Elon Musk? Okay, we're back. Well, we've already talked a little bit about Elon Musk, but now let's talk a bit about whether or not we are giving the world's richest man too much oxygen. I mean, Harriet, is it a sign of things to come because of his relationship with President Trump? I mean, is this the world we are now living in, where Elon Musk kind of sets the political weather here in the UK? He's also got a view on Germany, France. I could go on.
I mean, it's not a question of us giving him the oxygen. He is able to dominate our media agenda. He's able to dominate the political agenda because of the power he has through his social media platform, backed by his immense wealth. But I think the very telling thing about Musk is not just that he is the richest man in the world that there's ever been, and he uses his wealth on social media and communication globally, but also he is a proxy for Trump. He is not just a friend of Trump or influential on Trump. He is part of the Trump administration. And there's an unwritten diplomatic law that states who are allies of each other, and obviously the US and UK are allied states, should not interfere with each other's politics. And what we've actually got is a part of the Trump administration directly attacking our Prime Minister and setting a complete political agenda. And you could almost see the calculation that Keir Starmer was making in his first response to that question you put to him at the press conference, Beth, is that he didn't mention Elon Musk. And you must wonder whether he's thinking, if I have a go at Elon Musk and that's having a go at Trump, will the price be paid in lost jobs in this country because of tariffs being imposed? What is the best way to deal with this? Is it to call him out and stand up to a bully? Or is it to recognise that we've got to do it behind the scenes because we cannot jeopardise our economy, our trade relationship, our security relationship?
I'll tell you, it was interesting actually in the pod, because when Jess talked about the response, she said, well, Keir Starmer phoned me, the Home Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, and you're like, the Foreign Secretary? But of course, I mean, that tells you quite a lot, doesn't it? Because this is about diplomatic relations. And it's really interesting, Ruth, because in the past few months, because you brought up the fact that Musk has been trolling Keir Starmer since July last year, really since he became elected. And in the past few months, it was always this thing about kind of ignore Musk. I mean, and I think that there'd been a view in government like, don't go toe to toe with Musk because there's a wider issue here. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, at some point, does Trump think this guy's a liability, not an asset, or is he a proxy? I mean, can you see a world in which Trump gets pissed off because he's like, hang on, Elon Musk is like, I'm the president and Elon Musk is taking all the oxygen?
Yeah, so I think there's a really high chance that Elon Musk either gets bored with politics and moves on because his Department of Government Efficiency, where he gets upset with actually how governments work and how they don't work like corporations, and he stomps off in a huff, or he falls out with Trump, or he goes beyond the pale even for Trump. So I think that the likelihood of some sort of implosion is quite high. But Harriet is right. So we've all been treating him, and all the discourse, and even the way we've introduced him in this podcast, has been as the world's richest man, the owner of a Platform X. Actually, he is not just that, while that is true. He is an incoming member of the United States cabinet. He's been given a cabinet position in Doge, who has specifically called for the king to dissolve parliament so that there can be another election, who has called for the arrest of the prime minister of this country, who is an ally. I mean, I have no idea why the US ambassador hasn't been absolutely hauled in and had his meeting without tea and biscuits, as they say in the army, about this, because already he's not even in office yet, and we're already treating Donald Trump differently. We're already just being like, oh well, there's no point taking him on, or you can't feed the bear, or you shouldn't prod the bear. Actually, at some point, there will come a point at which world leaders will have to say, you don't get to just say you're going to annex Canada, take back the Panama Canal, and invade Greenland. That's not okay. We will at some point have to stand up to him.
If you're sitting in Downing Street at the moment and you're like, what is going to be this Trump administration? And the point is that there he's also, as he's saying, like, doesn't rule out invading Greenland and the Panama Canal. He's also saying, I'm going to put enormous tariffs on Canada and Mexico. He's also saying that he's going to end the war in Ukraine in 6 months. So what Donald Trump does in the White House has a material impact on our economy, on our security here in the UK. And as a Prime Minister, you're trying to navigate that.
And there was almost a kind of fascination and in some cases a weird kind of glee from some quarters at how Theresa May completely had the wrong personality type to deal with Donald Trump the last time. Like she just wasn't equipped to kind of deal with that at all.
Yeah.
I'm not, I don't know if Keir Starmer is. We'll find out.
I think it's very difficult for the government to have a plan for how to deal with Trump, because there is a new certainty now, and that is uncertainty. Yeah. Who could have predicted 2 weeks ago this is where we would have been with Musk-Trump? So I think it's really difficult to have an orderly approach when you are dealing with a disruptor. And it's difficult even working with allies, because they are subject to the same uncertainty as our government is. So I think we're just going to see more of this. And it's going to take a while for the government to find its feet to deal with its most important ally on security, as well as on the economy. It's very important economically, but also in terms of an ally on global affairs. How do you deal with a situation where you've got a presidency that's gone rogue?
I think, look, Keir Starmer will want to be one of the early visitors to the White House. No doubt he'll want to build that relationship. He's quite thick-skinned, Keir Starmer, in the sense that when he says, I don't really care what people say about me, I think he actually really doesn't. And it might be that maybe he can handle Trump in a way where he just kind of does what he does and he doesn't get too kind of ruffled. The other thing is that it's been happening with the whole Trump-Musk reform conservative axis has been the kind of bromance between Farage and Musk. I mean, he was over at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's Florida residence, meeting with Musk. There was talk about $100 million donation. Now Musk and Farage appear to have fallen out. I mean, is the one thing that at least the government could do is to change law to ensure that, massive donations from foreign actors such as Elon Musk, I think he'd have to do it through his company anyway, just can't happen. I mean, what do you think of that at the very least?
Well, we've got laws in this country which prevent the use of money to influence elections, which outlaw foreign donors making election contributions to political parties. There is a sort of third way of doing it via a third party through companies. And also the amount of money that's spent in politics is too high anyway. I think the government are going to be moving on this because there's too much money coming into politics. They've got to protect the integrity of it being a national decision, not a decision which is made abroad by foreign money. But actually, the Labour Party should have done something about this ages ago because it was evident we needed to sort out party political finances. The difficulty of doing it now, and I think it is right to do it now, to reduce the cap on spending and also to toughen up the preventions on foreign money. The difficulty is it looks like it's a way of undermining Nigel Farage and reform, and it looks as though it's in direct response just to America, and they should have done it a long time ago. It's now a more difficult climate to do that in.
Do you think they have to swerve it then?
No, I think they have to do it because it just in practice has needed to be done for many a long year. But I think it's important that Keir Starmer does get an early visit to the White House when Trump is inaugurated. But, he'll have in mind that Trudeau went down to have a meeting with Trump in Mar-a-Lago and, went out of his way to be engaging with Trump. And shortly after, Trump calls him the governor of the state of Canada. And it turns out that Trudeau is actually out now. So I think that there is such a level of unpredictability that the normal things that you would do to relationship build, to have close diplomatic ties, to do visits, all of those things actually can work, or they can be used against you by the Trump administration. We are in such a level of uncertainty. And the other thing is it's all happening very rapidly. So you can't take a few days to respond and to think about your position. You've got to be coming out snap like that because it's right onto global media via Musk instantly. So the government were absolutely right to do the pivot away from this is not about free speech versus censorship. This is about truth versus lies. But it took them a day or so to get there. So they've got to, increase the speed.
The thing that concerns me is the disinformation. Yeah. So as a journalist, what you find is people will talk to you and they will just be saying things to you that is materially, it's disinformation or misinformation, and it's what they believe because they believe that is the truth. And I think this is potentially, and this is not about Musk per se, but broadly about how social media and mass communication has changed, and proliferation of communication has changed communication, is that if you lose the truth, then you really are in dystopia. And that's the thing that concerns me about it, that this person with a platform of millions and millions of followers, a lot of people will believe stuff that is just untrue. And how do you deal with that? I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? The whole thing around elections was Russia using social media and bad state actors using social media as a way of spreading disinformation, undermining democracies. And you're kind of seeing this play out now with an individual that is going into the US government, which is going into what the world was meant to be the world's greatest democracy. And I think that's where there is a step change between what happened in the past and what is happening in real time right now.
Nobody's immune to it. I mean, look at the attack that Elon Musk tweeted on Gordon Brown, saying that he'd issued a guidance to police saying not to prosecute people from minority ethnic communities, which was wasn't misinformation. It was just a lie. And yet that is out there, and Gordon has rebutted it. But all around the world, with his millions of followers, that's what people now, as you say, Beth, think they know about Gordon Brown. And I'm not sure we should be calling it misinformation anymore. It's lies. It's truth versus lies. We're in a absolute war here.
I mean, the only thing I would say that as well just is that I know that because we are politicians, journalists, people that work in communications and work in Westminster and work in Holyrood, or, you know, we spend quite a lot of time on social media. That's a way to disseminate information. I think in the real world as well, it's like not everyone in this country is hanging on every tweet that Musk puts out, and maybe they are still getting their news from the BBC, etc., and Sky and stuff. Where
I don't think it's just about individual tweets. I think he makes the political weather.
Yeah.
He makes the media weather, and nobody is sheltering from that storm.
No. Well, let's leave it there, because I mean, this podcast is also the first of the year back. We might not have a big UK-US election this year, but my God, we're going to have a lot to talk about. So that is all for this week. Remember, you can listen to the full interview with Jess if you haven't already. It's already in your podcast feeds. Have a listen. Send us in some thoughts, reflections. Love to hear from you. You know that you can get in touch whenever you would like. You can voice note us on WhatsApp to the burner phone 07934 200 444. Email us at electoraldysfunction@sky.uk. And also, can I end this by saying that Harriet Harman has arrived in the studio today looking fine in a new, what's it called, kind of macho,
It's a trouser suit.
a macho sort of grey trouser suit from M&S, and she just looks fine. I just want to let you all know that.
Well, I made this mistake of seeing a very elegant, slim, beautiful woman wearing this trouser suit. So I immediately said, "Where did you get that from?" And she said, "M&S." So I set off to M&S and bought one 5 size larger. I don't look quite like she did, but it's very comfortable to wear.
I think you're looking damn fine. That's it for this week. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, and love and admiration to Jess Phillips.